This is Twit.
So one of the interesting announcements that that everybody brought to my attention, and I know you were talking about it both at the time and I'm sure during your previous podcast, was Apple's announcement of Sign In with Apple.
Yes, which they're going to enforce. Jim Dalrymple, or maybe it was James Thompson, told us they're going to require it on the App Store.
I have that in our show notes.
Yeah.
So during yesterday's, for those who don't know, during yesterday's Apple Worldwide Developer Conference 2019 kickoff, Apple announced their launch of a privacy-respecting sign-in with Apple OAuth redirection service, similar to the very familiar sign-in with Google and sign-in with Facebook that is becoming increasingly ubiquitous. And they did something clever, though. They beat all other OAuth providers to the punch by adding a feature to their forthcoming OAuth redirection service, which I just sort of named as I was putting the show notes together, Managed Random Email Address Provisioning. And I'll explain why I called it that in a second. It's a brilliant idea, and it's a reason for using Apple's OAuth service over others, even if one isn't that concerned about OAuth's tracking. Okay, but let's back up a little bit. First, we know OAuth is a convenience, but it comes at the clear cost of explicit and high reliability tracking. When our browsers are redirected through that chosen third party's authentication provider, Facebook, or Google, whatever, that third party knows who we are, since we have an account with them, and they know to which site we are signing in, since they're negotiating our identity with that site on our behalf behind the scenes. And all of this uses first-party session cookies, so no kind of tracking, blocking, third-party cookie blocking, fingerprint, none of that applies. None of that works. So it is the number one most reliable means for a third party to know who you are and where you're going, that exists today. So it's no surprise that Facebook and Google have said, oh, yes, use our OAuth service. And we know that there's just no way that Facebook and Google, both having strong financial interests in compiling activity profiles about everyone, are not actively leveraging for their own purposes what is essentially very specific and clear who you are and where you're going information. So, by comparison, traditional browser tracking is inherently soft and fuzzy and requires some degree of behavioral inference. Not so with OAuth. So on the tracking privacy front, Apple's announcement was clearly, brilliant from that standpoint, and a poke in the eye at all other OAuth trackers. The problem is that for the experience to be seamless, our browsers need to be maintaining an active session state with the OAuth provider so that our browsers can bounce through them transparently. But currently, I have no such relationship with Facebook, and although I'm currently an avid Apple device consumer, I don't currently have such a relationship with Apple, because Apple is not otherwise a provider of online services for me. I recognize, I'm a Windows guy, not an Apple guy, so I'm not logged into my iCloud account or anything on my Windows system. But I do have a relationship like that with Google. Every one of my various browsers maintains persistent sessions with Google because Google already offers many online services which I use. And while I dislike the idea of being tracked, it's not really something I worry about that much. As our listeners know, I hate the idea from a technology standpoint of it not being under my control. If I were to care a lot about it, that really seems wrong. And I certainly understand that many people do care. But remember, as part of the OAuth transaction, the site being signed into can and does request data from the site you're signing in with, such as your username and your email address. Since this happens behind the scenes, users may not even be aware of it, or if they are shown that this will be happening, they're typically not given the option to have that information provided or not. Now, Apple actually does, as I have a screenshot in the show notes that shows that happening. But what this means is, and what may mean a great deal to people who already strongly trust Apple, and in the moment we'll see why deep trust is required, is that rather than providing the service that I'm being signed into my real Apple email, actually that would really annoy me, because that email account is unique and I only use it with Apple, so it is completely clean. Nobody else has it or knows it. I get no spam or any nonsense there. So I really like the fact that if I get email, it's absolutely from Apple. So Apple will be offering the option to proactively mask their users' actual email by providing a randomly chosen email relay address. And on the screen of the WWDC conference, Craig put it up. The example was FC452BD5EA at privaterelay.appleid.com. So the idea would be if you say sign in with Apple at some third-party site, at your choice, Apple will make up an email address and provide it as yours to that third party. And I called this managed random email address provisioning, since also on stage yesterday, Craig indicated that Apple users would have some means for curating and removing the relay addresses from any sites from which they no longer wish to receive mail. But this does place Apple in the enviable position, should they ever decide to leverage it, and I'm not suggesting that they would, but they will be receiving and viewing, if they wished, and then forwarding all of the email being received. In that sense, it's not unlike Google with Gmail, who, as we know, sees all of our email, runs their bots through it, and does whatever they do with it. Anyway, in the show notes, I have a picture that we have seen of it's where it says use your Apple ID, and in this instance, it's Kim_Kilgo at iCloud.com to sign in to Fratello and create your account with the information below. And then it shows name, Kim Kilgo. And it looks like you could hit X and remove that. I don't know what happens if you do, if you fill in a blank, or if they're just not going to provide that to the third party.
You choose one of those three.
You think it's not? Well, no, because
his name X. Yeah, maybe they don't. You don't give them your name. No, you could.
Right.
Get rid of that. And then choose something else.
And then you have radio buttons for either share my actual email, the iCloud.com account, or you can click a button and say hide my email. Now and then it says forward to, and then your iCloud account. So anyway, what happens is Apple would make up an email address, which they would record in a database associated with you, so that when subsequent email comes in there, they would relay it, they would forward it to your actual iCloud account. So that would mask your iCloud account email from the third parties and give you apparently administrative control over it. There would be some interface. You log into iCloud with your browser to Apple, and then you would get a list of all of the sites who have a forwarding for you. And who knows, maybe you could either remove the forwarding Well, I guess no, you wouldn't be able to do that. Well, yeah, you could cancel the forwarding, in which case their email would no longer go through to you. Otherwise, you'd have to go to the site and then update your email address with something else. So anyway, it's probably not a big deal that Apple is seeing your email pass by. We trust them. They make a big point of being, privacy enforcing. As I mentioned, Google already gets and scans the email. But anyway, it is something to keep in mind. For me, my Google email is already my designated junk email bucket since its anti-spam filtering is so good. And as I said, today my Apple email account is absolutely pristine because I've never used it for anything else. So for me, I think I'd rather continue doing, using sign in with Google and have that email address being disseminated. And boy, I mean, it's a junk pile. And I'll keep my account with Apple clean. But Leo, as you mentioned, and as I did pick up, interestingly, for one reason to think that this will become prevalent, at least from within apps over which Apple has control, like those for iOS, is that offering it will not be optional. Down in the fine print at the end of Apple's new App Store review guidelines, Apple states, quote, "Sign in with Apple will be available for beta testing this summer. It will be required as an option for users to be offered to users in apps that support third-party sign-in when it is commercially available later this year." So that is to say, any app that offers sign-in with Facebook, sign-in with Google will be required to also offer sign-in with Apple. So, as soon as that starts to happen, it's going to appear. So any apps which offer OAuth third-party login will have sign-in with Apple also. So anyway, I think this is good news. I know that there are people who dislike the idea. I mean, actually, Leo, I was surprised that it got as much traction as it did, as much pickup in the industry. But it's interesting to know that the downside of sign-in with ... is that you are trackable by the third party that you're using as your authentication provider. I didn't realize that was as widely understood as it is. So, that's good.
Yeah. It's a setting, by the way. I love this setting in Brave, that privacy browser based on Chrome. You could turn off those Facebook, Google, Twitter bugs. LinkedIn also is in that list.
Except you can't do it in this case. Yeah, you can't do it in this case.
Not in apps.
No, I mean, you cannot use OAuth without having that trackability. I mean, the trackability.
Oh, yeah. So what it does is it turns the bugs off so you can't use it. Basically, you have to log in with an email address.
Well, no,
which I choose to do because honestly, when I deleted my Facebook account, it disconnected a lot of accounts I'd use the Facebook login for.